Welcome to this edition of Under the Radar for Saturday, May 6th. And before we get to today's stories, I just want to thank Gary Awesome, who did a great job in my absence last week. So if you haven't already, go over and check out Gary's channel for some more awesome content. So this week, like a moth drawn to a flame, I'm going to return to those hallowed institutions of higher indoctrination. So let's start with Dartmouth University. Dartmouth survey, Liberal students would be uncomfortable living with a Republican. Now I know what you're thinking, it's an article from Breitbart. You can't take it that seriously. Well, for the safe spaces out there, let's go to the actual source. The Dartmouth, America's oldest college newspaper, founded in 1799. Well, I guess that means it's good because it's old or something. A survey of Dartmouth's political landscape. In a campus-wide survey fielded from April 9th to April 13th, 432 students answered questions about several issues such as tolerance for and relations with opposing political viewpoints, views toward President Donald Trump, and recent government actions like the Syrian missile strike earlier this month. The findings speak to contemporary debates and provide an understanding of where students stand on political issues. Among all respondents, 63% identified as Democrat, 23% as Republican, and 14% as independent. Now here's the chart that Breitbart focused on, and it asked the question, how comfortable would you be having a roommate with opposing political views to your own? So 39% of Democrats would be comfortable having a roommate with opposing political views, whereas 61% of independents and 69% of Republicans said they would be. Or put another way, 45% of tolerant liberals would be uncomfortable having a roommate with opposing political views, whilst only 16% of independents and 12% of Republicans would feel uncomfortable. Now, given the sample size, the margin of error is about 5%, so the actual difference between the percentage of Democrats that feel comfortable and uncomfortable is statistically insignificant. But let's hear what some interested parties had to say about the outcomes. President of Dartmouth College Democrats Charlie Blatt, 18, said she. I bet you, like me, assumed that Charlie was male. You just assumed her gender, didn't you? Shame on you. Said she was not surprised that most Republicans reported they were comfortable with having a Democratic roommate, given that the majority of students at the college are Democrats. It's unfortunate. I wish we had more political diversity, she said. I think the dialogue is good. Vice President of the Dartmouth College Republicans, Abraham Herrera, 18, echoed Blatt's sentiment, saying that since Republicans are a minority on campus, they'll end up with a roommate of opposing political views the majority of the time. So I guess the idea is that if you're a Republican, you're more likely to end up with a Democrat as a roommate, and once you get to know that person, you'll find some common humanity, and therefore the political differences will matter less. And that's why Republicans are more open, because it reflects their actual experience on campus. Now, whilst that might be true to some extent, I'm not sure I buy that as a satisfactory explanation for the wide disparity. So this is all a little bit messy. What they should have done is asked what is the political persuasion of your current and former roommates, and then found out if there was a significant difference between those that had roommates of different political persuasions from those that only had roommates of the same political persuasion. But let's push on into the void. There was another set of very interesting charts. These charts asked whether you think certain individuals should be allowed to speak on campus. Interestingly, more people think Milo should be prevented from speaking than Richard Spencer, and almost a quarter think the President of the United States should be prevented from speaking on campus. Amazing stuff. But this is overall approval of all students. What about by party? Well, not surprisingly, 52% of Democrats said no to Milo, and only about 35% of Democrats said no to Spencer. Obviously, Milo is very triggering for certain types of snowflakes. And the article, for some reason, doesn't mention the split on Trump, but I think we know which way that would break down. Now, this is obviously a better measure of how tolerant you are of differing opinions, but it also suffers from the obvious bias that all these speakers are on the right of the political spectrum. As Blatt said, she would be curious to see how Republicans at the college would feel about a controversial Liberal speaker such as Cecil Richards, the president of Planned Parenthood. Exactly. Why didn't they ask that question? Well, Blatt put her finger on it. Again, the term controversial at the college is now often thought of as probably right-leaning, since the balance of political opinions is left-leaning. Yep, that's right. Extinguishing potential human life is not considered controversial. How progressive. But now for some good news from the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education, or FIRE. Congressional resolution urges colleges to end use of free speech zones. This afternoon, Representative Phil Rowe of Tennessee introduced a bipartisan resolution to pressure colleges and universities to end the use of misleadingly labelled free speech zones. Why would you need a free speech zone on a university campus to begin with, in a country where free speech is enshrined in the First Amendment? The idea that you'd need to cordon off part of the campus for free speech is ludicrous. Hey, we have a special zone over here where you can engage in free speech. Well, that's great, but what about the rest of the campus? Oh, no, sorry, that's a safe space. Consider the case at West Virginia University in 2002, which boasted of 7 free speech zones, which accounted for just 5% of the total campus area. So 95% of the campus was off limits to those horrible free speech advocates. This is classic newspeak. War is peace, ignorance is strength. Restricting free speech to small areas on campus is promoting free speech. Nah, we see straight through your bullshit. House Resolution 307 cites FIRE's research to demonstrate that the free exchange of ideas is threatened at colleges and universities across the country. Whereas despite the clarity of the applicable legal precedent and the vital importance of protecting our nation's public colleges as true marketplaces of ideas, the Foundation for Individual Rights in Education has found that roughly 1 in 10 of America's top colleges and universities quarantine student expression to so-called free speech zones, that more than 20 speakers were disinvited from speaking on campuses in 2016, and surveys of 449 schools found that almost 40% maintained severely restrictive speech codes that clearly and substantially prohibit constitutionally protected speech. States such as Virginia, Missouri, Arizona, Colorado, Kentucky and Utah have all passed legislation to end the use of free speech zones at public colleges within their states, and similar bills are pending in California, Louisiana, Michigan, New York, North Carolina, Tennessee, Texas and Wisconsin. So I guess if they do away with free speech zones, the Snowflake Brigade will just turn around and make 95% of the campus a safe space instead. Might be just easier to close these places down. Or you could just make them more expensive. At least that's what we're trying to do here in Australia. University students set to face higher fees as part of government shake-up. As part of the shake-up, student fees would increase by 1.8% next year and continue rising to a total of 7.5% by 2021. The government argues the changes would mean a price hike of between $2,000 and $3,600 for a 4-year course. From July next year, students will have to start paying back their loans when they reach an income level of $42,000 per year, down from the current level of about $55,000. Yeah, so the government wants you to start paying it back earlier. I wonder why that is. Well, don't expect the ABC to tell you. Let's see what the Australian says. By 2018, the student loan book will reach $70 billion, with perhaps $19 billion unrecoverable. So that's 27% to be written off as bad debts. Now, that's worse than any bank's bad debt loan book during the financial crisis. So the problem is that a lot of students drop out, and then also a lot of them never earn enough to start paying the loans back. Now, of course, the entitlement generation will see this as a major travesty, but it should be remembered that the government will still be paying the majority of people's fees. In 2016, local student university course fees amounted to $12 billion, of which $7 billion was paid directly by the federal government to the 43 universities around the country. On average, university fees are $19,285 per year, which $11,431 is paid by the government, and the remaining $7,854 is loaned to the student under the government's HEC scheme. In other words, even after the announced changes arrive, the subsidy per student remains generous. Generous? Surely you jest. Let's get a resident BuzzFeed Oompa Loompa to break it down for us.
But now the government wants current and future students to pay more for their degrees and pay them back sooner. Why? Well, so they can save a few $1 billion. Let me explain.
Oh, thank God she's here to explain. It's so difficult.
Over the next 4 years, university fees will be going up, some by thousands of dollars. An arts degree will cost $22,000, business will cost $35,000, Bachelor of Science or Engineering will go up to $39,000, law will be $45,000, and the most expensive degree, a 6-year medical degree, will cost $75,000. Not only will degrees cost more, students will have to start paying them back sooner, once they earn $42,000 a year after they graduate. And the more they earn each year, the more they'll have to pay back each year. It'll start off small, a few $100s, then it'll be a little bit more, and then by the time you start earning the big bucks, it'll be thousands of dollars.
I like how she thinks she's actually made a point here. You know that money you borrowed so you could get an education to get a decent paying job? Well, it turns out when you start to earn more, they want you to pay more of it back. What a rip-off.
Students will also have to pay for a bigger chunk of the cost of their degree. They currently pay 42%, and taxpayers pay the other 58%. Well, from next year, students are paying slightly more, and taxpayers, well, they're paying slightly less. So to sum up, students are going to pay higher fees and they're going to pay them back sooner.
Oh, the humanity. Students will only get 54% of their education subsidised. But let's ask the students themselves what they think. Here's Cancer Feed again.
The government wants students to pay more for their degrees. Do you think that's fair?
Obviously not. I think students should pay absolutely nothing to go to university. Everyone should be paid to go to university, actually.
Now, I must admit, even I was surprised by that. I mean, I had him pegged as one of those annoying socialist scumbags that thinks his education should be free. But even he one-upped what I imagined he'd say. Bravo, sir. Expect this guy to be leading the purges in 2022.
In terms of our situation now, it's a lot better than, say, America, but I still feel like education should be free.
They shouldn't have that much of a say in what we should be paying for our fees?
No, absolutely not, especially when the government's cutting the corporate tax rate, the fact that, the government wants to give $50 billion in tax cuts to some of Australia's richest corporations.
Education is definitely a right, not a privilege.
So there you go, the opinions of the enlightened. Education should either be free or you should be paid to undertake it. Or you could take the route of these commissars of the future.
Universities, no costs, no fees, no corporate universities, no costs, no fees, no corporate universities, no costs, no fees, no corporate.
Now I'm sure their very considered opinion is bound to win taxpayers over. So that's going to do it for this week. Remember, try not to take your rage out on a millennial, but if you must, make sure they're university students. See you next time.